This is episode 3 with special guest, Robert Scott Bell. Welcome to My Kid Cures Cancer. My name is Ryan Sternagel, former regular guy turned dadcologist, cancer coach, and health advocate. Each week we'll talk to a new expert on a particular aspect of beating cancer or human optimization to bring you one step closer on your path to true health. Thanks for spending some time with us today. Now let's dive into this valuable, life-saving information which you're not going to hear about in a mainstream hospital. Alright friends, in a world where big pharma, big agri, big media, and big government are all out to control as much of your mind, your body, and maybe even your soul as they can, sometimes it seems like there's nowhere to turn. Every time you start to feel good about a new idea on how to stay healthy, there's another headline about another study telling you how it's a terrible idea, or that maybe you could even go to jail for that idea. It can quickly get the little guy feeling like there are just no good answers and that the world is a pretty dark place. Well, one man has said enough, and for years has been tirelessly leading the way for those seeking these answers back into the light of common sense. Taking on bureaucrats and corporations that would stand in the way of health freedom and making sense of medical propaganda, the voice of health, freedom, and liberty, Robert Scott Bell. Host of The Robert Scott Bell Show and in broadcast media since 1999, Robert covers news stories in the health, political, and economic worlds for 2 hours each day, 6 days a week on the Genesis Communications Network. His bottom line is bringing the freedom and power to heal back to the people where it belongs. Robert is a homeopathic practitioner and has served on the board of the American Association of Homeopathic Pharmacists. He has a passion for health and healing unmatched by anyone in media. And man, was this exciting to get to do this interview for me. I've been listening to Robert pretty consistently all along. Our personal road to healing is sort of the hub where all these natural practitioners might call home base in the media, so to be able to interview the guy that has been interviewing all of these guys that we've been following for years and having years of clinical experience of his own as well was quite an informational and enlightening treat. We sure did cover the waterfront when it comes to health and healing. Robert has a way of circling around every possible angle of health and zooming into the technical and then back out to the philosophical, all the while weaving together such a cohesive narrative that I've not heard anyone do nearly so elegantly, and it was just a really neat conversation to be a part of. Robert talked at length about his views on the root cause of cancer and disease in general and the law of the terrain. He spoke about many chronic health issues he had as a child and how only when he became rooted in certain spiritual principles was he able to receive and incorporate the information on natural health he needed to heal himself. Robert got into the history of the medical system and tells about how amazingly in early America and elsewhere, if you were an aspiring doctor, you were just as likely to go to a homeopathic or naturopathic medical school as you were one that taught the use of petrochemical pharmaceuticals, and how it came to be that this is no longer the case. He explains how it is that doctors of today manage to stay so well insulated from information on natural health, along with his contention that an objective look at the state of affairs in the country today would reveal that modern medicine has become the new state-sanctioned religion. From there, we went into all things homeopathy, and Robert broke down the principles of homeopathy for us in a way that we can understand, how we can start to find the right one for our condition, and how they can be incorporated into a healing protocol, including for cancer, and including for use on children, which is of course a topic very close to me. That being said, I'm so glad you stopped by My Kid Cures Cancer, where it's our goal to bring all sides of the discussion on how to heal cancer and be truly healthy to the same table, to give you one place to tune in for the most well-rounded perspective possible. We'll get to Robert's interview momentarily, but before we do, just a few things to go over, starting with our favorite thing in the world, that the disclaimer that this information you hear on the show is for informational purposes only and is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. All right, today's question from our friends comes from Reagan on the Facebook page. I want to hear specifics on your anger-fighting diet. And I assume by anger she meant cancer, although anger-fighting diet would be pretty interesting as well. Do you follow guidelines? What are y'all eating? And honestly, Reagan, just as we don't follow any dogma when it comes to one method or approach to healing, we also don't like to follow any too strict of guidelines per se when it comes to diet, other than like I mentioned in the quick comment that I made that, super clean, which means free of any synthetic pesticides, herbicides, or GMOs. If we were planning on making a certain meal and we go to the grocery store and one of the ingredients isn't organic, we either change the recipe or just make something else altogether, period. And it has to be incredibly diverse. We want it to be plant-centered, which means the vast majority is coming from plants, but we do throw in some animal products as well. We don't really like to get into don't eat this or don't eat that. We like to get a little bit of everything. The main thing for us is more of the proper things to look for in how we select our food. Aside from organic, if it's animal products, we're looking at it has to be pasture raised, no exception. If those animal products are dairy, they have to be raw, grass-fed, and we do tend to stick to fermented and cultured stuff and don't drink a ton of milk straight up. We actually keep all dairy to more of a minimum for that matter. We do also keep gluten to a minimum, not because it's bad in and of itself, but because the wheat has been so hybridized that there's way more gluten than there should be, and it's largely unrecognizable to our bodies at this point. If we are going to incorporate wheat specifically in something, we'll look for einkorn wheat, which has not been hybridized, and if we are going to get bread, it's going to be a fermented sourdough. Lastly, all nuts, seeds, and grains are soaked and or sprouted. Oh, and we make a ton of fermented foods as well. The only announcement I have is thank you all so much for making the launch of this podcast a success. We've already gotten a ton of downloads. Day one, I think we broke 1,000 as I record this on day 2, and with some really nice reviews as well. And on that note, if you are near a computer, or I guess you get to do it on your phone as well, I can't tell you how much rating and reviewing the show would help us and mean to us. We're really trying to get into the new and noteworthy section on iTunes, and this is largely determined by the reviews we get. And for my little piece of advice for the day, I thought I'd keep going on the diet thing and just tell you guys how we ensure we're actually going to have a super diverse diet full of all of this good stuff. I think that's the hardest part for everyone. We all know generally what we're supposed to be doing, but it's figuring out exactly how to do it consistently that's another thing altogether. For some time now, we've incorporated what we like to call our prep day, and it has been life-changing for us. On one day of a week, for us it's Sunday, we'll do the majority of our shopping, and it will be based on what we're going to make on this prep day. We'll always make a giant batch of green smoothies, sometimes a huge batch of juice. It was more often when we were in hardcore cancer fighting mode, and a little less now that we're transitioning into more of a maintenance protocol. But we'll make a fermented food of some sort. We always have some sauerkraut on hand, and we do experiment with a lot of others as well. And FYI, it's not as hard to do this as you might think it is. We'll also start with some combination of nuts and seeds and grains and soaking and sprouting. And on that note, maybe some flax and chia crackers or something like that. Like I said, it's really changed our lives and also saves a whole ton of time throughout the week, because now you just have all this healthy stuff you can just grab and eat or make stuff with. Give it a shot and let us know what you make or what you're planning to make in the comments to the show notes of this episode, which you can find at mykidcurescancer.com/Robert Scott Bell with dashes in between. So that's mykidcurescancer.com/Robert-Scott-Bell. All right, after 2 whole days up and running, we're still looking for someone to get that party started on our Patreon account. Again, this is a way that you can support us in our mission to bring you better and better content, and you can do it simply by pledging the equivalent of, say, a nice bottle of kombucha every month. You can find more details on that at mykidcurescancer.com/crowdsponsor. Again, that's mykidcurescancer.com/crowdsponsor, which is all one word. Be sure to check out the My Kid Cures Cancer YouTube channel if you haven't already. We're posting all of these interviews there, as well as a whole bunch of other in-person interviews that I do at conferences and such, as well as a lot of how-to type videos on how to incorporate all this stuff into your life on a consistent basis. All right, with that, let's get to the interview with Robert Scott Bell. After having gone over it again, I feel the need to say bear with me on some of the tripping over my words. I'm certainly finding that this is an art form that I am getting better at all the time, but this was one of the first I did, and Robert is so eloquent that there's certainly a bit of a contrast to say the least, but luckily, since Robert is so good and so insightful, that it still made for an incredible interview, so let's get to it. Robert, how are you? And thanks for coming on.
Hey, Ryan, honored to be here with you. And look, anything we can do to further that mission of bringing the power to heal back where it belongs, I'm with you.
Sure appreciate it. And yes, ditto, I guess you could say. So on a personal note, this is pretty neat. As just about a year ago, I believe I was in honor of the election. We could call it doing my first big league radio show. When I sent you my article on the Budwig diet and how we've used it on our son, and he asked me to come on and talk to it. And fast forward a year, and here we are, and I'm doing one of my first big league interviews with none other than RSB. So this is pretty neat.
Yeah, I love that you're taking it and going out with it because, I've said this often. I've been in broadcast media a lot of years, and there are a lot of people that have a perspective that they don't want others to join in any way to dilute the message. I'm like, are you kidding me? We can't have enough people doing this and good people with integrity and a passion and, a personal stake in it like you have. So I'm just humbled that I could serve as a conduit to just crank it up with you. So thanks for asking me to be with you.
I appreciate it, and yeah, like we were talking about before the call, it seems like, especially when you're looking into cancer, there are so many different schools of thought and camps people seem to fall into, and you got the natural stuff and the institutional stuff, and nobody in the natural side seems to agree with each other on a lot of this stuff, and so yeah, I'm looking forward to trying to bring everybody together as far as cancer is concerned, and yeah, it doesn't hurt that I do have the experience with it as well. I've been at it for a couple of years now.
Bringing everybody onto the same page is an age old dilemma, and I think what we got to do is find a way to bridge the common principles, if you will, because everybody can extend out in different ways based on if it's rooted in principle. If it's not, for instance, if you don't acknowledge the role of the liver as your primary organ for detoxification, and you just kind of go forward and say, hey, I got a delivery here, special delivery from my wife, an organic smoothie, whole organic foods in this thing.
Well, there you
Who
go.
knows what other kind of great stuff. By the way, fiber included. We don't juice it out necessarily. Juice is a fun thing once in a while, but for me, I like everything. But unless we start with a basic principle, can we agree that the liver is critical for health, for human health, animal health, all of that? Can we agree that if it's not working, we're in trouble? There's nobody that doesn't need an optimally functioning liver, right? And it's sort of like sometimes you have to bring it down to such a basic place because you assume somebody knows something, and you know what they say about assumptions, right? So part of it is doing that, and also hopefully having a little bit of humor, even in the face of cancer disasters, because there's plenty of them. But if we're not rooted, for instance, in that concept of liberty, that's why I say liberty and liver, two L words that I love. A third one being vitamin L, the love that we talk about. If we don't start there, sometimes we're making that leap well beyond it, and even though we have a good idea or an ideal or a goal, we kind of leapfrogged over that starting point. So that's an important part for me because I had to start my healing process by learning about those basics before I could then go out to the world and communicate.
And that's one thing I was going to ask you about, actually, before we get into the topics at hand. It's always interesting to me. It seems like just about everyone in the health space didn't necessarily intend on getting there just because of some innate passion. They had some sort of health challenge they had to overcome, and then found their way into all this one way or the other. And I know you have a story like that early on. I was hoping we could hear about that.
Well, it's definitely a God thing for me. And I think a lot of people that are on this path recognize it.
Yeah.
I wasn't ill because of a random act of unkindness. There were very specific things that happened to me. And I could say, physiologically, what happened is that I was, vaccinated from birth, and I was fed baby formula instead of real milk from mom. The doctors told her that that's the way to go. And of course, from that moment forward, pesticide-laden, traditional as it became, standard American diet type foods. Now, the illnesses and the ailments I suffered were mysterious to the doctors, as I had gastrointestinal issues, inflammatory conditions within the GI tract, within the musculoskeletal system, skin rashes. I mean, I had, rashes behind my elbows, behind my ears, behind my knees that I would scratch until they bled. Of course, the doctor said, here's a steroid cream. And look, it stopped itching. But of course, what does a steroid do but stop something that the body is trying to do for a specific reason, perhaps even to throw things out through the skin that my liver was not able to handle due to the toxins I was exposed to. I did, later on in my childhood, at the age where I had adult teeth, had some cavities, and they put in mercury fillings. Of course, that only made things a lot worse. But no doctor, no dentist had mentioned anything about toxins or the liver throughout my entire upbringing. I was on antibiotics all of the time. Ear infections, sinus infections, throat infections, and intestinal infections. So vitamin A was an antibiotic. So through my upbringing allopathically, I say I was pharmaceutically grown. It's not an exaggeration. I was grown up, not on vitamins, minerals, or trace minerals, but on allergy medications, allergy shots, antihistamines, steroidal and non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs and things. So for me, being the ultimate pharmaceutical insider, because it was inside me, I had, to pray to God to heal, for healing. And that was the turning point at a certain point in my life where I said, God, these doctors don't know what they're doing. I want to be well. I don't want to be sick my whole life. I don't have energy. I've got all of these ailments. Please heal me. And you know how if you pray to God and you only accept the gift of healing in one way and not another, you're sort of rejecting the potential of the gifts in any number of ways that could come to you. Now, I'm speaking with hindsight now.
Yeah.
But I had to be open enough to receive the gifts of healing that would later come to me in a way that was completely foreign to my upbringing. So what I had to do was get grounded in spiritual principles, rooted in spiritual principles. And that's sort of what happened for me. I was taught certain basic principles. And at a certain point, it was much later, at the age of 24, when I met a homeopathic doctor, came into my life. He was from Belgium originally and immigrated to America. I would not have been prepared to hear what he had to say to me, much less in his broken English, had I not been rooted in basic principles of how this world works, even if I didn't know the nutritional stuff yet. Basic principles. And so that opened me up to be able to have the ears to hear, right? The eyes to see, the heart to listen, all of that. So that's why I say it's a God thing. I could have cursed God, and I'm sure I did at certain points in my discomfort, my teen years, going, why won't you heal me? I feel it's miserable. I got pain. And of course, it wasn't the lightning bolt from the sky that I would have gladly accepted if it would just take it away. It was the healer that came into my life. When the student is ready, the teacher appears, right? I had to be ready. I had to be softened up. I had to go through the pain, the angst, the anxiety, all the things that I suffered to be ready to hear the principles that would turn my world upside down for the better, because it empowered me to help heal myself, as opposed to be healed by someone that I could say, you healed me. And then, of course, I'm the victim in this case. I'm the victim of the illness, and I'm a victim, you might say it's a good victim, of the healer. But either way, I'm in a position of recipient, passively. And I was like, wait a sec, I want to actively engage in this, because if it's just a random act, I got randomly well. Therefore, I could get randomly sick like my elders. Grandparents, aunts, and uncles died of cancer or the treatment for cancer.
Yeah.
And they were all healthy as kids in their generations. I was not healthy to start. So I could see the future. I didn't like the future. And that's what motivated me to find something else and to be open when it finally came into my life, even though it was a shock and it was overwhelming. But to say, hey, you know what? There's something to this whole other world. And, we can get into that. But that's kind of the short version of what opened me up. It didn't happen instantaneously. I didn't pray and then I was healed. It was like, no. You got some things to learn before we can get you the people that can help you, that have gone before you, and you can take what you will learn from them and apply it to yourself and then help others to do the same or greater.
Yeah, one of my metrics, I guess, that I run everything through is, one, is it natural, and then closely related to that, and more importantly, is it God given? Did this come from God? And that's, when you're wading through all sorts of different options in terms of treating cancer, I feel like that's a good one to stick to.
Good litmus for sure. Yeah.
And that's, it's funny the way the world works. And like you said, or like I just said, God-given and whatnot, right after the cancer diagnosis of my son, maybe 2 weeks after we got the diagnosis, the first truth about cancer came out, which was the quest for the cures back then. And man, we were already kind of on that track. I knew enough to know where to start looking, but
Yeah.
that was pretty huge in giving us that big kickstart. And yeah, talk about Lord works in mysterious ways and all that synchronicity. Yeah, it's just mind blowing to think about sometimes. But
I think, Ryan, going back into the history and seeing many of these pioneers that some of which we reference in The Truth About Cancer that have been, 100 more years before us, they were really islands, in a sea, if you will, of complete ignorance, complete lack of consciousness in that. Now, it's not a total thing because there were natural doctors throughout our history. You can read the Bible and find, nature is the healer, right? And the substances of creation are the healers.
yeah,
But there was an abandonment. There was a gap in our recent history where we were enamored with technology, with advancements in science, and we kind of disconnected from the natural world and said, "Hey, we can conquer it, right? We got this thing beat, right? We could shortcut it." And those of you who are farmers, real farmers, organic farmers, know there is no shortcut to rehabilitating and keeping the soil rich with nutrients, much less the plants and animals and the animal life, in fact, the microbial life that keeps the soil a living entity to feed the plants to be healthy, and then those that consume them are healthy as well. So there was an abandonment, particularly in the 20th century, although there were seeds planted before in the Industrial Revolution, the ability to conquer the earth itself. Now, were we being good stewards, or were we getting full of ourselves in terms of what we thought we could accomplish with no consequences? It's kind of like children. You think you can get away with anything. And if a parent allows a child to get away with everything, they'll grow up to be irresponsible adults. They won't do very well. They may end up in prison or may end up dead. So there's an obligation there. But I think we've been given the freedom. In fact, I know we've been given the freedom to screw up royally. And I don't dismiss that lightly. I'd rather have the freedom to screw up because it's precisely the things I didn't know that taught me the things I do know now, right? So that I could help others.
yep,
So it's not me arguing that we should, ban mistakes and ban stupidity or whatever it is, because I think we've all been there. I certainly have. But in the transition time, over our lifetime here, there has been a transformation of consciousness due to suffering. And it's not just one person, like a Royal Raymond Rice speaking out, or an Antoine Béchamp or a Claude Bernard. These people as historical figures, or even in a modern context, some of the docs that have been before us to kind of pave the way for us to learn this. But now we do have, like with The Truth about cancer, an ability to access information through the internet like never before. And I don't begrudge that anyway. I'm happy because my goal is to also reach the folks that are ready to hear the message. But apparently more people than ever are ready to hear it. And where I was one in a, I don't know, that was ready to hear it because I had suffered enough, I still have peers of mine, my age group, that continue to live a lifestyle and now suffer severe ailments, even cancer. And maybe now they're ready to wake up. I just, for whatever reason in me, I had the foresight. I looked at others around me. I looked at my relatives, my elders, to see their suffering and asked them about their childhood. And none of them were sick in childhood other than to have an occasional acute cold or flu.
yeah,
And I had all the chronic diseases that didn't exist back then for the most part. So I could see the writing on the wall. So for me, I could look and say, okay, let's see what's happening, what's coming. I don't like this path. I don't know another path, but I don't like this one. There's got to be something else. And so the opening was there because I was sincere in my seeking. I think that those who are not sincere in asking, for instance, they might come to me as a homeopath and say, I want to get well. And I've had enough experience to say, do you want to get well, or do you just want a homeopathic drug to replace the chemotherapy drug, and you're not going to change anything in your life that brought you to this point?
the magic bullet.
And so this is
yeah.
a bigger picture on healing.
Yeah, and that's a kind of a good lead-in going back to talking about the 20th century and how we came to be with the current medical system that we have, and a good deal of our audience will be familiar with the backstory of just how it came to be like this with one branch of medicine just dominating everything. But there are also a lot of people that find their way through us through trying just whatever they can to deal with a cancer diagnosis, who are completely new to the health world and have a really hard time understanding how there can be all of these options that their doctor has just either never heard of or just dismisses out of hand. And, initially most people will either decide just to put it all aside and just go back to listening to what their doctor tells them, or on the flip side, think that their doctor is, somehow this evil guy that is, that's trying to suppress this hidden health knowledge from them, and it's hard to get across to people that neither of those options are really right, and you really need to know the history behind how this all started, and you did, speaking of the first quest for the cures, such a good job of laying out. I'm sure you could take it back as far as you wanted, but just those early days in the early 20th century.
Sure.
What's the word I'm looking for? What series of events led us to get to where we are today? If you could just lay out some of that history, I think that would be good.
Well, what was the question I had? How is it possible that I never heard the word homeopathy until I was 24 years of age here in America? 24 years. Now, it'd be one thing if it was completely new to the planet and it's like, wow, homeopathy is just coming out of Germany, right? But yet, as I learned about this at the age of 24, I began to study history in a different way than I was taught in government indoctrination centers, aka public schools. That homeopathy as a system of healing, which came about in the late 18th, early 19th century in particular, and I was like stunned to find out that homeopathy was a mainstay of medicine even here in America through much of its history, because it initially came about by a German physician, Dr. Samuel Hahnemann, in again 1790s, early 1800s in particular, where it started kicking into gear, and it became a worldwide system of medicine based on the principle of like cures like. Now we can go into homeopathy a little more later, but it was just that starting point was like, what? Wait, I never heard about this. It must not exist, right?
Yeah.
Then you go back into the history books and you find out, wait a second, there were homeopathic medical schools at the beginning of the 20th century. In other words, if you were going to medical school, you were just as likely to go to a homeopathic medical school as any medical school. And there were naturopathic medical schools. There were eclectic herbal schools of medicine. And then, of course, there was this emerging field that we learned about then of petrochemical patent medicines based on the Rockefeller oil monopoly. And then there was a point, 1910, where the money from the Rockefeller Carnegie Foundations funded a preordained commission study to basically standardize all medical education, because we got too many different kinds of doctors here. This is not going to work for us. We've got all these medicines we want to get on the market that are developing through organic chemistry. And again, this is not organic food, organic chemistry, organic chemists from Germany. They learned how to manipulate molecules, and oil was this great new resource to do that for a lot of things. And so they said, we got to have a better market than this. And remember, Rockefeller said competition is a sin.
It's a sin, yeah.
Yeah. And of course, that's in the Bible. I don't think you can find that, but in Rockefeller's Bible, you could find that. So they funded this study, Abraham and Simon Flexner, and Ty Bollinger and I wrote about it as well in Unlock the Power to Heal, our book that we wrote together. And I talk about it all of the time, because without a historical context, we have no earthly idea how we got here, much less how to correct it, make a better choice. And that's what my journey has been. So they established this commission. The commission was preordained. It was basically to say, you know what? These medical schools that are teaching petrochemical patent oil-based medicines are legitimate, and they shall be funded and accredited. All others shall be called quackery. And so the diminishment over the first half of the 20th century was on in terms of homeopathic medical schools, naturopathic schools, even chiropractic education, and to the point in the 1950s or so, it was almost gone. Now, I went to Emory University in Atlanta, and I found out that there was some level of homeopathic curricula in the medical school up until about 1949. And about after that, it was like it was gone, like it didn't exist. Hahnemann Medical School in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, named after the physician who developed homeopathy, Dr. Samuel Hahnemann. They don't even know that. Maybe a little bit now they do today. The only physician in if you go to Washington, D.C., and you want to find out, hey, I wonder if they honor a physician with a memorial in all of Washington, D.C., because there are memorials for a lot of things, right?
Yeah.
Got the Jefferson Memorial. The only physician so honored in our nation's capital is a huge bust at Scott Circle, of all places, in Washington, D.C., of Dr. Samuel Hahnemann. And in fact, 100 plus years, 100 plus years ago, it was dedicated. William McKinley, President McKinley was there. The marching band was there, all of that. It was a big deal. I was there for the 100-year rededication. And at that
That's
time,
neat.
Clinton had sent his band to do it. He wasn't there. But again, entire swaths of history completely erased. That doesn't happen by accident. And of course, if you know anything about how we get to places, we learn about the Holocaust. Raised Jewish, you learn a lot about it, and losing relatives in your history, and you realize one of the most profound statements: those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it. And we're in that scenario, and it is a Holocaust of a different kind, but the end result is a lot of needless death. Is the allopathic medical monopoly. My good friend, investigative journalist John Rappaport, called it the Church of Biological Mysticism. I modified it slightly to call it the Church of Pharmaceutical Mysticism. And over the course of the 20th century, this became an organized religion like no other, more powerful, in fact, than our traditional religions. And many on the political left have abandoned the church of their youth, and that's their freedom to do that, if that's what you want to do. And they have now adopted the Church of Pharmaceutical Mysticism as their religion at least 6 days out of the week. Maybe Sunday they go to their old church, synagogue, mosque, whatever they go, but they're worshiping. Their doctor becomes the priest in that church. And this is where we get the problems of people with cancer diagnoses that are not awake, and then the family members that are say, hey, you need to look at this, look at homeopathy, look at detoxification. Hey, check out The Truth About Cancer, Ty Bollinger, all the doctors they talk about. And they go, oh, but my doctor says that's quackery.
Yeah.
This is how this started. And it's been entrenched in the DNA of the allopathic Western mind. Much like the Pentagon, it operates on a premise of kill people and break things. Although modern medicine is much more efficient at it than the Pentagon. And they do it in a surreptitious manner because their message is that we're here to help you, we're here to heal you, we're here to support you and get you well. But the reality is, outside of acute interventions, emergency trauma medicines and surgery, they're an absolute disaster. An absolute disaster if your goal is health and healing and vitality and thriving. So again, that's a long story short in our discussion here, but that's why it's an important thing to communicate. And I'm glad you bring it up, because the whole healthcare crisis in America is not due to expensive drugs. The drugs are too expensive. Poor people can't afford them. The problem is too many people can afford them.
Yeah.
Too many people are being poisoned, especially those that can least afford to be poisoned, because they're also nutritionally deficient because they're eating subsidized, corn syrup laden processed foods, the inner city folks. And so this is leading to epidemics of diabetes, as they call it, diabetes, obesity, et cetera, and cancer and heart disease, all of these things. It's not real food. So the solution to that is not real drugs, which are fake molecules created by man, not by God, but to go back to our ancestry and understand what is the basis for health and healing, what is the basis for the real cause of disease. And again, this was a whole transformation for me, because suddenly my whole world turned upside down. Now, it was for the empowerment of me, but initially it was quite scary, quite upsetting, quite frightening. And as I began to learn how modern medicine didn't know what it was doing, I had to really find, is there another way? Because if not, then I'm screwed. And everybody's screwed because they're the experts, right? But it turns out their expertise is in an area that has nothing to do in reality with health and healing, particularly from chronic degradation diseases, and that includes the big C, cancer.
Yeah, there's definitely that element of personal responsibility that once you realize that there's this whole other set of things out there that you could be looking into, then it's all on you. There's no doctor telling you this, take these steps and you'll be just fine. It's it's a wide open world, and that's tough for a lot of people to wrap their minds around, for sure.
I just don't like being a victim. And I know that there are people that do, because, to not be a victim means, as you said, to take responsibility. But I guess that's a choice we all get to make. And at a certain time, you get sick and tired of being sick and tired. You get sick and tired of being pushed around. You get sick and tired of being a pinball in a pinball machine, for those of you old enough to know about those. And at that point, you say, you know what? I either got to pick myself up by my own bootstraps with the help of the Creator, in my opinion, but to guide us. But we can't, let's say, blindly go about throwing ourselves from doctor to doctor. I mean, there is guidance available to us in a very direct and personal way, an inner way we get the messages. If we're not going to listen to them, Again, that's, and I've said this about modern medicine. Modern medicine didn't go wrong because it started using petrochemical patent medicines. It went wrong because it divorced itself from the spiritual life, the spiritual world, the connection to spirit. Because at that point there was no guidance. It was only, hey man, I'm smart. I got a brain. It's arrogance, it's ego, and that gets in the way of the communication between us and that which created us. And so it isn't the tool, the drug, that is the bad thing. It's the way men use it, and women too, who become doctors indiscriminately all the time for everything. Where an appropriate place for a medicine like that would be in a crisis, a life and death situation, to get you out of that crisis and get you off of that drug almost as fast as you put them on it, and then move on back to nature, back to the natural realm. And there's an appropriate place, but it's so far inappropriate where we are that we're as a culture, as we see with the transition from President Obama to President Trump. I believe President Trump has a lot more inclination to go more holistic. But even that is still, we've got the vast majority of our body politic arguing about how we're going to fund this healthcare system, which has nothing to do with health.
Yeah.
Right. So that's the history.
Give people an allowance towards more green smoothies or something.
Mm. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's stop thieving, right? Thou shalt not steal. I think that was in the Ten Commandments.
That one was in there.
We have this concept of charity by force of a gun. That's not charity. So when people say, hey, it's the government's responsibility to provide you your health care, when it wouldn't know health care if it bit them in the aspirin, this is not a pathway to success. So, when we even see about the social engineering, which is the tax code of saying, hey, you know what, we'll let you keep a little bit more of your money over here in this health savings account, which we could argue is better than having it taken from you by force and only used in a certain way. But then again, how will they limit you to use that? They'll say, no, you can't use that money for green smoothies and organic non-GMO food. So it's still a control factor. Why should it ever go to them to be then doled out to you or directed in terms of your activity and action? Because they're sometimes the least connected to God people you've ever seen, people in politics. You really want them directing your health, your healing, and the healing of your children? And we see that disaster in California when they've gone full-on communist in taking the children, saying they're wards of the state. At any point we say, if we don't like what you're doing, whether it be vaccination or cancer therapies, et cetera. So we have a wholesale reversal of thinking that must take place. This is not a subtle tweaking of the way our thought forms are working. What is the role of government? When you hear somebody say healthcare is a right, they don't even know the definition of a right. If it's a right, then I can take my firearm and point it at the head of my favorite doctor and say, give me health care, because it's my right. And of course, if you violate the rights of someone else in the exercise of your rights, they can be no right. That can be no right by definition. But we're dealing again, where we started today, Ryan, was definitions, right? Can we agree with certain principles, certain baselines? The liver is very important for detoxification. We all need a healthy liver. And maybe based on that, we should stop poisoning the body. Okay, let's start there, right? So it's the leapfrogging into real adult communication based on, we have a basic understanding of this. These are what these terms are. This is how they're defined. We agree on that, and it's important. If we don't even know what healthcare is, if we don't know a right from a privilege, how do we expect politically to solve this? That's why withdrawing your consent is probably the most powerful thing you have. More than your vote, more than a bullet in a gun. The most powerful thing you have is your consent and the ability to withdraw it and move on to a different direction. Now, those with the so-called power and more guns may threaten you or may really do damage to you for doing that, but it's still our obligation to stand up and be belligerent and diligent in defense of our real rights, the right to life, liberty, property, pursuit of happiness. And that includes healing. Benjamin Rush was credited with saying, I wasn't there, I don't know for sure, that unless we put medical freedom into the Constitution, a time will come when medicine will organize into an undercover dictatorship to restrict the art of healing to one class of men and deny equal privileges to all others. He didn't say rights, interestingly enough. So they didn't put it in directly, explicitly. And of course, now we end up with the medical monopoly or the Church of Pharmaceutical Mysticism in violation of the First Amendment, which says Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of a religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. The state-sanctioned religion is modern medicine. Don't fool yourself. We don't live in a Christian nation anymore, as it's been played out over the last 100 years. We live in a pharmaceutical nation. the United States of Drug America. You want to bring it back to the Judeo-Christian principles, you got to set up, because most people that are Jewish and Christian, much less Islam, whatever religion they believe in, still are worshiping at another church in defiance of the biblical text that they would read on one day of the week. And I don't know, this may upset some of the people listening and watching right now, but I believe it needs to be said, because this could turn around in a nanosecond if the preachers, if the priests, all of the people in the churches would say, you know what, we got to stop worshiping and praising our allopathic doctor, people in our community, and start praising the healing that we read about in our spiritual text, and get back to food as medicine. Instead of barbecuing or frying up GMO chickens, we really need to bring whole, organic, fresh foods into our picnics and teach people how to care for their temple, right? This is a sacred temple. We've been given this life, and we desecrate it every time we eat a GMO food. Again, it's upsetting to hear, but it needs to be said. And I guess that's why I'm in talk radio, because I'm willing to say it.
Indeed. Yeah, it's, it is interesting now that we're on this side of the fence. We'll go to one of Ryder's friends, little birthday parties or something like that, and he's got his green smoothie that he's sucking down, and all the other kids are eating, like you said, the chicken nuggets and the barbecue and so on and so forth. And it's like we said, it really takes people, looking within themselves and figuring out what's important.
You said that exactly right.
Yeah. So on this note, though, you would still think, with all the information out there and with, everyone, because it's not like it's just you and me talking about this. More and more people every day are finding out about natural treatments and natural cures, if you want to call them that, and getting healthy. You would think that the doctors, the MDs, that is, would have heard more about it, or at least at this point be, more receptive to the fact that there might be something to it. But it doesn't seem to be the case. Did you have any insight into, how they managed to keep themselves so well insulated, or, I guess maybe how they're kept so well insulated, one or the other?
Yeah, when you can take the last name of a doctor with integrity, a gastrointestinal pediatric guy, and turn his last name into a verb, this is a message to all allopathic licensed doctors. You will, if you stick your head up and start doing things, saying things that violate what we perceive to be our tenets in our church, and they're not going to say it that way, you will be Wakefielded. Okay?
Wakefielded.
Dr. Andrew Wakefield. What was his crime? In the 90s, he was observing, gastroenteritis. I mean, he's a gastrointestinal pediatric doctor. And he started seeing a lot of these kids with GI issues. And of course, the parents would bring them and say, hey, this kind of happened shortly after we got the MMR vaccine. He said, okay, well, let's analyze this. Let's look, let's investigate, let's detect, let's see what's in their guts that's doing this. And, he dared to actually observe and report on his observations with other doctors in the study, and reported on his findings to say, hey, we're finding a novel new form of colitis, iatrogenic enterocolitis, which is, doctor caused. We don't know what it is, though, colitis. And we see here, there's interesting that this so-called strain of the measles virus that's only found in the vaccine is also in their guts. And, oh, by the way, many of these kids are also suffering with autism. Now, he didn't say the vaccine caused the autism. He just simply observed and reported on something that was not popular for the purposes of their agenda. And so one of the answers to your question is, they teach other doctors, do not think outside of your training. This is what I call your medical horse blinders. They're right here. You don't look beyond that, because if you do, we will come after you. Now, we have state boards of licensure in America. These state boards are run not necessarily by doctors that are in practice, although there might be one or two on them, but they're bureaucrats. They're people beholden to other special interests like the pharmaceutical interests. And when the prescription rates fall in any given practice, they find out about it, and they somehow pay a visit or let them know, hey, what's going on? Why aren't you prescribing? So there is a business model, again, going back to Flexner Report, that is set up to keep doctors from education on out. Education, they don't learn about it. A couple hours of nutrition if they're lucky, even today, even though things are changing. Still, it is a pharmaceutical-driven agenda. And for doctors to step outside of that box, they'll often be scapegoated, they'll be martyred. Some doctors have survived it, have written books, and they've gone beyond it, and they're communicating these things. But oftentimes they're persona non grata in their profession. They may lose their license, their ability to do the work that they went in for. And they might have come out of medical school. What do you got? 100,000, 250,000 worth of debt.
Yep.
There's a lot of control there. If you want to pay for your car, pay for your kids' college, etc., this is the game that's been played. So there are economic considerations of control. And that's a big reason why this is. Now, fear is the ultimate answer, I believe, in this case, because you frighten the doctors into, if I do this, this will happen to me. Now, if that fear overwhelms righteousness, your love, and your connection to the source of all sources, you will let that fear override, and you will do what even you perceive to be the wrong thing. And this explains why doctors have a higher rate of suicide and depression. The dental profession even more than any, because they work more with mercury. But there's a schism in their psyche. They recognize on some level that what they're doing is not correct. Maybe they went in for the right reasons.
Yeah.
And this was the message from my uncle, the doctor, who said, don't be a doctor. Don't grow up to be a medical doctor, because there was a schism in his own life. And he was in nuclear medicine. He was in X-ray technology and all of that. He wasn't doling out the drugs. He was analyzing and reading stuff. But still, he saw what was happening. And he said, you don't want to go here. It's miserable. And this is another aspect of this. Now, maybe enough doctors are getting sick and tired of being sick and tired too, and that's why they're waking up and moving a different direction, or their family members. I had calls with my mentor from doctors who are oncologists, this is many years ago, who had patients who had cancer. Of course, they would give the traditional chemotherapy and all of that. But when they or their spouse was diagnosed with those same cancers, suddenly they were calling a homeopath to say, hey, do you have any other things that we could do here? Because I'm not going to do what I do for my patient, right? But that's the schism. But they'll still go back the next day and dole it out. So again, there is a psyche. There's a real disturbance in their force. And drugs help them to continue, because if they're on a lot of drugs, maybe they're not paying attention anymore. It shuts down that connection even further. So these are some angles on an answer to a very legitimate question some people will ask, to say, well, if this stuff is for real, you guys with your natural methods for curing cancer, why doesn't everybody know about it? Think about some of the things I've just told you, and you'll understand that, well, there's a control, and there's a way to control people through fear of loss, fear of, all of these things that are very real to them. And, not everybody has the courage of their convictions to stand up against that, against the bullies, whether it be in their industry or outside of it, in government, et cetera, like we talk about on radio all of the time.
Yeah, Wakefielded. I did not know that was a term. Yeah, and that's, like you said, I've heard several interviews with the clinic, the doctors that run the clinics, say over in Germany, the more holistic alternative cancer clinics, and that's what they always talk about is having classically trained MDs come to them when they need help, or even heads of the various medical organizations and so on and so forth. And that's
yes.
Yeah, I didn't know that about the suicides either, that the doctors had the higher suicide rate. That's probably
one of the highest in the professional worlds, yeah. And if not suicide, then certainly depression, because it's a depressing field to be in. If you go in for the right reasons and find out all the tools you have are harmful and deadly,
yeah,
even if you're not consciously aware of it, spirit, soul, that deep part of you knows it, and that causes a schism, and that can create depression. So it's not me telling doctors that they're evil. Sure, there are evil doctors. There's evil everywhere if you allow it to flourish. But
sure.
The point is, in a general way, I'm not generalizing. I never have to say doctors are evil. They do what they're trained to do. I mean, if you need a gastrointestinal surgeon, you want the best one possible. It's not the gastrointestinal surgeon's fault that you need or perceive the need for a surgery that maybe I can help prevent by the things I talk about. But, the point is, they're trained. What are they trained to do? This is what they're trained to do. So if you go to those doctors, don't expect them to say, here's a homeopathic remedy. You now don't need the surgery. That's not what they're trained to do, unless they go outside of that box and get trained, and they still have their license to practice. Or as some doctors have said, you know what, I don't want a license. I am a medical doctor, but I'm not practicing. And then they go off and do something else. And that's okay, because licensure is not about protecting the public. It's about protecting the economic self-interest of a specific community or group, in this case of allopathic petrochemical prescribing medical doctors.
Yeah, no, I think that's an important note for people to understand is the whole license system. And I think with the advent of the internet and how we're all becoming more connected and how you can, because I think early on maybe the license system did have some merit, whether you're talking about a doctor or, say an electrician, because there's some degree of you want some assurance that whoever's working on whatever it is they're working on for you knows what they're doing. But today with the internet, and you really can't do anything unpunished. And all the review systems out there, whether it's Angie's List for just handymen around the house, whatever you might need done, or the various doctor review and rating sites I see popping up now. It's I think the need for all that is on the way out. So.
Yeah, well, you're right. And the whole idea of licensure being the only way to protect the public, it's ludicrous. Again, we've been programmed to believe that. But even in terms of professional licensure of plumbers and electricians, how long would an electrician that's not qualified survive in the marketplace? The first person that says, I hired this guy, my house burned down.
Exactly.
They're not going to be working anymore. I don't know why people don't understand that. No, there are scam artists within every field. And I think licensure has been used to protect the bad doctors more than it's done to protect the good people who go to those doctors. I mean, there was a big scandal last year. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution did a big investigative piece on sexual molestation of patients by licensed doctors. I mean, it's systemic at this point. It's not just a one-off scenario, but they weren't losing their licenses. The licensure protected these doctors.
As long as they got their license, yeah.
As a homeopath, even if there were such a thing as licensure where I live, I would reject it outright. I don't want to have anything to do with a license from the government. I didn't even get a marriage license. You kidding me? Why would I want the government in my marriage? But again, we've been programmed. Oh, it's not official unless the government blesses it. You see what I mean about religion?
Yeah.
Government has become your religion.
Yeah.
And that which they are, acknowledging as only legitimate, allopathic medicine, or the purchasing of government and regulators by that profession, which is very profitable, particularly the drug industry.
That's always one thing that stuck out to me about the gay marriage debate is what are we doing, getting our blessing from the government in terms of whether we see ourselves as married or not. It's like if two gay people want to say they're married, people can either agree with that or not agree with that. But why do I need a license? Why did I? And I did get a license, even though I think I was coming around to this way of thinking even back then. But yeah, it's why do I need a license from the government to say I'm married to my wife?
Right.
Why do I need a license from the government to have a dog?
You got it. Again, permission culture. Don't ask for permission where none is required. But if you perceive it's required, that means you're doing something that would otherwise be illegal. Healing? That comes from God, not government. And you tell me that's illegal, you take it up with the Creator, because I'm not asking for permission from you dunderheads in government. But again, that's what we've got, a consciousness shift happening, and some people still believe they're little children. They grow up to be adults, but they're still little children that seek permission of experts that don't have a clue about what they're seeking. But they don't know. I didn't know. I had to suffer enough. Thankfully, I survived that initial phase and was able to reverse most course in that case, and again, become empowered by that process. Now, if I was driven by ego, then I would look to get, a degree and a license and permission to say, look what I have. It's like, no, it's not me. It's something far greater than me. And I'm here just to communicate those principles that you can apply, all of you. Doesn't mean if you get a degree, that's bad. It's your choice. My point is that I listen to folks who have been there and done that, and they have a track record, they have experience, we can communicate it, talk about it, then we put it to the test. Oh my gosh, it works. Oh, but he didn't have a degree. That it can't be real. Yeah. Like, wow, have you subjugated yourself to even these institutions of higher indoctrination? And that's why, I'm not impressed by people with degrees that I call degrees. But it doesn't mean they couldn't impress me if they did something right and good, but it wouldn't be because of their degree necessarily. So it's a transformation. It's man who invests in ego and emoluments and accolades versus the principles of creation and applying them. And then if you want all that other stuff, fine. But don't think that that other stuff is more important than that principle or those principles that guide all of life. That's how creation works. Again, it's a different message, not as popular in certain business circles, but I find that it works for me.
It's all about results. It's all about results. At least it should be.
Yeah,
if we were more measured on the results that we were able to generate versus whatever title we've managed to accumulate at the end of our name. And I like you said, I think that's where it's going. Mm-hmm. So all that being said, I don't want this whole episode to be doom and gloom, and I think we've done it pretty.
I think this is a happy, wonderful message. I mean, make you smile to communicate it. You're setting up a pathway to freedom. That's a good thing.
That is a good thing. It is a good thing. But as long as I do have you with me, we've touched on homeopathy, throughout the conversation, and it's for whatever reason I've been researching cancer, and moreover than cancer, natural healing, all sorts of natural healing methods for 2+ years now for my son, and for whatever reason, homeopathy is the one thing that I just, for whatever reason, have had such a mental block against really diving into. I don't know. It's maybe the whole concept of the minimum dose, and it's not really any of the substance at all in there that you're taking, and is it the C scale or the X scale? And I just have had a hard time wrapping my mind around what exactly is supposed to be taking place inside of the body when you're talking about homeopathic remedies. So, I mean, and I don't think I'm alone here. I talk to a lot of people who, that's the same way for them. So if you could, I want to get to how we can relate homeopathy to a cancer treatment protocol. But first, could you just break down in your best layman's terms exactly what homeopathy is and what it's doing inside the body to help it heal?
Well, the first part of that is basically substances from the plant, mineral, and animal kingdom. And it could be any substance particularly, but there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of substances that have been analyzed, tested, and that are in the, excuse me, hold on, I think I have a sneeze. Nope, no sneeze. So as I'm speaking about this, I'm thinking of Allium cepa, which is the red onion. And that's the common cold remedy because of the irritation that happens. Is like it can manifest energetically. But the idea for a molecular reductionist Western mindset, because we're in the West, we're an American, most of us here, Americans.
Yes.
We think if a little is good, more has got to be.
More is better.
Way better. And if you're a bodybuilder in America, even more, right? So it's counterintuitive. What we're doing is taking substances that in an otherwise healthy person could cause symptoms if you ingested it, for instance. So the Allium cepa I mentioned, if you chop the red onion, you'll have teary eyes, stuffy nose, corrosive feeling, feels like a head cold or an allergy, and that's often indicated in that way. You could take Rus toxicodendron, which is the poison ivy plant, and of course it can cause, all the itching and redness. So you could take it in a homeopathic form. You're diluting it, serial dilution to succussion, to the point where it can't cause you the poison ivy. Mm-hmm. The onion now is diluted and shaken to the point where it can't cause the symptoms that it caused in its mother state. And you take it, and at that point, it seems to counteract, neutralize, or somehow alter the symptoms, the manifestation. Not only of that, but broaden like cures like to the law of similars. And you say, okay, what kind of things happen when you have poison ivy? Eczema? Okay. So it could not be necessarily, you didn't have poison ivy, even though the antidote for poison ivy could be poison ivy in a homeopathic form. But you can have similar suffering. And that's enough to match a remedy with an ailment. Now, it gets more complicated when you dilute and dilute and dilute to the point like a 10x is 1 part per 10 billion. But if you go beyond 24x or 12c, now you're beyond the number of Avogadro. For those of you in high school chemistry, Avogadro's number. And that's the point where there's supposedly no molecule left of the original substance. Although, with advances in nanotechnology and detection, we now know we're dealing also with nanopharmacology, but we're dealing with substances beyond measure, but we can now sort of measure them. But the theory is now you're beyond physical potencies or physical attenuations. What are you diluting? You're not diluting anything technically anymore. It's energy. So now we're dealing with a non-material type of healing. And that is difficult for materialistic molecular reductionist minds that we have in the West to wrap our heads around. So it becomes, well, that can't be real. How does it interact? Except that we recognize, even in a spiritual sense, that we are energetic beings. We're not this physical body. This is the body that, houses us for a while we're here, but we're much more than that. And in fact, energy is all around us. You can't necessarily see it, touch it, taste it, unless you put your finger in a light socket and you'll find out, I couldn't see that electricity, but damn, I can feel it. So the cell has energy. The nervous system is energy, energetic impulses, signals. We talk about energy fields all of the time, whether you get quantum physics or wherever you want to go with this. The point is there is an innate intelligence the chiropractors talk about, a vital force that is beyond necessarily material reductionist validation or identification. And in this way, we apply these remedies appropriately based on the law of similars to affect the change that we look for in the body, that correction. Now, again, I go to the innate intelligence. You can't describe it. And in many ways, they haven't identified the pathway of, I don't know, what is it causing the function to change, right? If you measure a drug molecule and you track it all the way down, radioactive, isotope it down, you go, oh, it went here, it did this, went here. And you can't necessarily do that with homeopathic medicine. So it defies a lot of explanation. And so we go, well, for some that are, I call the skepducks, the not real skeptic. The skeptic is okay. You want to question things. You want to doubt things. You want to have, but when you get to a religious belief system about allopathic medicine, there are statements from those on the skeptical side of things that are not real skeptics or pseudo skeptics will say homeopathy can't be real because if you take a whole bottle of it, it can't even kill you. And they say that with a straight face.
Yeah.
And you're like, so your litmus for a real drug or a real medicine is that if you take it and it can kill you, it's real.
Has to have the ability to kill you.
Okay, that's your religion. That's your dogma. I've been there. I've done that. I'm not going back. So I'm not here to convince folks except to say when you utilize it, and particularly with children or animals beyond placebo at that point, you begin to say, oh, there's something to this. Now, it's very arduous to the process with what we call classical homeopathy to nail down the simillimum from the broad symptom base of the patient. How do we narrow it, and find one remedy that nails it, like in a rust tox or an allium cepa or something like that, or phosphorus, whatever it is. I have been trained clinically under the French approach, which is Hahnemann's latter years when he went to Paris and started seeing chronically ill aristocracy versus the simple German peasant farmers that had acute diseases and responded to one remedy at a time. So I was taught ways to use, we call it complexes, a series of remedies formulated together to address systems, organs and organ systems of dysfunction, like we talked about the liver. If the liver is dysfunctional, it can't do its job. That means all disease becomes possible. Yeah. And like I've learned about in Chinese medicine and even Ayurvedic medicine, thousands of years of history, they've said the key to all healing comes back to the liver. If the liver is functional, all healing becomes possible. If it's dysfunctional, all disease becomes inevitable. So that's a difference, and you won't always find homeopaths trained that way, so it becomes complicated and complex as they say, we're looking for the simillimum, we're looking for that one magic remedy that matches everything in its totality. Yet we're dealing with children and adults that are toxic and deficient, and that one simillimum, even if it matches, may not work the same way it did 250 years ago when we had simple German peasants working the land, growing organic food as food has been since time immemorial until man got in and mucked it up. And there is a different situation. We don't have layer upon layer upon layer upon layer of toxicity, deficiency, all of these things that are now complicated and corrupted organs and organ systems that need to be brought back online. So my view of homeopathy is different than many who are classically trained, although I acknowledge the validity of classical methodologies and the search for the simillimum. We have got to clear the terrain. Antoine Béchamp, Claude Bernard, we've got to clear the terrain in order to get the body clean and working enough that it can respond to the simillimum appropriately and then take us to the next level. But for now, I'm going to be working with organ systems and organs, the things that need to be corrupted. And in the case of cancer, I'll work even with sarcodes, which is homeopathic preparations of cancerous tissue to signal the body to target its activity, its immune activity against those specific cancers if you've identified where they are. That's another aspect of targeting homeopathy in cases of cancer.
Yeah, that's it always fascinates me whenever I do hear about homeopathy. The whole energy thing and quantum physics even always gets brought into play, and that's it fascinates me. That's why I'm getting more and more into just various energy medicines and schools of thought, and just trying to tie everything I know back to this notion that we are all energetic beings, and what does that mean in terms of where
Right.
I should be looking to go with my health and my healing if need be.
Yeah, yeah. It all comes down to energy in the end. That's the irony there, as we focus so much on molecules, right? And it's not to say that this body doesn't need them, right? But when I talk about promoting health and healing from cancer, I talk about the need for micrograms of selenium every day, right? We need that. We're not
Yeah.
going to do well without that. Cancer is inevitable without that. So it's a combination of everything until we become energetic light beings alone and drop the physical body. Then okay, talk. We don't need the physical stuff. But this is the point of we're between two worlds, right? We're in this world, but we're not of it. So how do we make peace with that? What do we do in terms of healing and moving more toward energy medicine? You begin to understand the energetic origin for all disease, emotional, mental. Talk about spiritual. All of these things play out as important as any physical issue. But I will say, I haven't seen real evidence of long-term success of praying away GMO food and toxins and pesticides,
Yeah,
right?
it's
Well,
tough.
I'll just pray it away. Okay, knock yourself out. I love prayer, but I think we're asked to do more than just pray it away because we're supporting the poisoning of our bodies and saying, God, take that away. And God say, well, uh, didn't you know anything about kosher laws written in the Bible? Of course, it was before the era of GMOs and pesticides, but cleanliness. There's certain things you should
Yeah.
eat and shouldn't eat, and toxic poisons that your body is not prepared to address and bind and excrete appropriately are not included in a healthy diet. So, to me, like you said, I ask people to be more responsible than some people are willing to be. And I don't judge them if they're not willing to do it. I'm just not going to spend a lot of my energy to help them if they're not willing to help themselves. And that's a tough thing. But you have to also believe you're worthy of that healing. And many people are not feeling that. They perceive that they're not. And the one way I can tell, is I can't. If your first two words are I can't, you're not really acknowledging your worthiness. In fact, you're spitting in the face of God to tell God that it can't be done. It can be done. The first thing you got to do is believe. I can. Even if you don't pretend you believe. You say fake it till you make it, right? Just humor yourself to say I can. I'll
Yep.
do it for a month, God. I'll do it. I'll do it. I can. I don't believe it, but I'm going to do it. I'm going to say it. And find out at the end of the month, it's like all these healing possibilities become opened up to you because you weren't the obstacle to your own healing. We're the obstacle ultimately. I believe, you know, God wants us to be well, but we have the freedom to reject the gifts of healing. We have that freedom. And I'm grateful for that freedom because I've learned a lot because of it. But a lot of people will curse God or curse me or somebody who brings that message to them to say, wait a second, you're telling me it's my fault. No, it's not that simple. It's not about accusations and things. It's about uplifting you, acknowledging your divinity. And when you do that, it's like, wow, the heavens of healing open up for you. So that's an important message. And yes, homeopathy can help, and whole food nutrition can help, and detoxification can help, and coffee enemas can help. All of those things. But again, there's a mindset, there's a spiritual set. All of these things are very important for recovery.
Trust in God, but row away from the rocks. It's one of my favorite. It's actually my little tagline on my email signature. It's right there.
Beautiful.
Yeah. Um, so it's interesting that you would bring up coffee enemas and detoxification and some of those things, because going back to this concept of clearing the terrain, when I think of clearing the terrain, I think of my infrared sauna or my coffee enemas or these sorts of things that you always hear about a lot
Right.
when it comes to natural healing. Would you be? I mean, I assume you're a fan of those things, but does homeopathy? What am I trying to ask here? Does homeopathy have the wherewithal to clear the terrain? I guess would be. Would you Would you
Yes.
clear the train homeopathically without employing anything else, or could you? I guess would be another way to put it.
Well, I did for a few years. I mean, before I learned a lot of these other things, I got back to basics. Now, step one, when 1A, detoxification was one, I got to stop putting the poison in my body, right?
Of course.
If you think, again, this is like praying it away. Okay, well, I'll eat garbage, but I'll take a homeopathic detoxifying remedy for my liver, right? No, that's not going to work. Now, I'm not saying that people that do that are not helped a little bit, because they are, but don't pretend that down the road you've completely obliterated that potential cancer in your lifetime because you're still consuming the things that facilitate it, bring it about. But in terms of restoring function, yes, homeopathy can do extraordinary things when done appropriately. But I still take whole food supplementation.
Yeah.
Right? Particularly because it's food. Food is your medicine, medicine, food. Ultimately, what is the process of digestion? Ironically, is to break food down into energy, to release it as energy in the body. Homeopathy happens to already be there, but because we have physical bodies, they require physical things too. So it's a combination of the things. Yes, I've seen people recover from cancer with homeopathy and cleaning up their diet and lifestyle. But as I've learned more about the deficiency syndrome associated with cancer and other chronic diseases, I didn't go, well, take homeopathic selenium, and that's all you have to do.
Yeah.
No, we need selenium. This is a physical body. And until you, as I said, until you drop it and leave it and move off in your light body or whatever you call it, you better take care of this thing. It's, it's a gift, and, it's a precious gift. So it needs certain things beyond just homeopathy. But yes, if you're living a healthy lifestyle and you're eating good food and it contains the minerals, the essential fats, all the things that are required of it for life, for vitality, then maybe you don't need all these other things. But we all live in a very toxic environment relative to what it once was. And so we have to do extraordinary things to recover, but then to try and thrive in an era where thriving is going to be more difficult because of the challenges to living a healthy life. I mean, we can change our food choices. We can clean up our water, purify it like I do. I use an Echo water system that produces molecular hydrogen, and it's great. It's fantastic. It makes all my supplements work better. But we're not in control of the air. In fact, even growing organic food in my backyard, it's not completely devoid of interaction with the environment. No. What's coming down from the sky, I don't know. So we have to be very, as I said, diligent in the word, proactive in counteracting that. And that means, in my opinion, even as a homeopath, more than just homeopathy, although homeopathy is a cornerstone, it's a key part of that recovery.
Well, and when you talk about thriving and just being in the best possible health you can be outside of disease, that's actually another question I had is when you talk about homeopathy, are there any recommended I don't even know what the word is, products or protocols that would just that maybe you employ to just facilitate a state of overall health or homeostasis or whatever you want to call it, or are we only looking at homeopathy when there's something to correct?
Yeah, three staples in my homeopathic mind, right? And I'm thinking of bringing them back out because I've utilized them for years, but for everybody else to benefit too. And that is one, detoxification, working with a formulation that you can use on a daily basis to counteract some of these environmental stressors on the excretory system, the organs, the liver, the kidneys, the colon, the spleen, the lymph, these things. And that would be a nightly ritual, very simple. In terms of GI issues, that's where I had a lot of my problems, malabsorption, elimination issues, gastrointestinal imbalance, even yeast overgrowth, things like that. We can look to utilize a formulation that addresses the entire assimilation and detoxification simultaneously. Because, liver, colon, there is a relationship, but there's the entire GI tract. A lot of it's about absorbing, right? Utilizing and appropriately the things you want to get in. So there's that elimination, assimilation. Yep. These are two. The third aspect homeopathically that I would see is to work with inflammation. Systemic, anywhere in the body. Could be vascular, could be skeletal, anywhere, neurological. The remedies associated with all of these three things can be combined in formulas like that. So we're detoxification, assimilation, and systemic inflammation. Kind of like, that's why we take antioxidants. That's why I drink, hydrogen, molecular hydrogen water, like the H2 that's in the Echo water. And we can do that energetically, homeopathically, in a gentle, safe, way on a daily basis. So those three things I would say could be part of a regimen that could be very simple in terms of recovery and then ultimately maintenance. And I'll talk more about that on my show because I'm really serious about wanting to bring that back out because I don't think it's accessible right now in what I see in the marketplace. But there are good options still.
Well, that's what I was going to ask. I mean, I hate to oversimplify it, but would there be any particular products we'd be looking for in terms of just addressing some of these mainstays?
Well, we did a lot of discussion with my good buddy Dr. Frank King from King Bio, and he's up in North Carolina. And we talk extensively about detoxification and GI health and other things. So they're available. Like I said, I may be working on, like I said, bringing out my own formulas based on what I've experienced over the years too.
Very good.
But so I wouldn't say there's nothing. But again, based on the way I work on a gentle, low attenuation basis, as opposed, some people believe in going to the highest potencies available, and that's fine. I have a concept of bringing people in gently, slowly, because there's a lot of people that got to get there, and I don't want to hit them over the head with a hammer too soon, right? And so gradually bring them there and keep a safe basis of response. So that's, again, we're talking, it's coming out right now.
When can we be expecting that? Just within the year, in a couple months?
Breathing. All right. Yes, within the year, maybe sooner, because it's just a matter of I've got them all together, but I just got to get them and manifest them. So yeah, I'll let you know.
Very good. Yeah. I want to jump into how specifically we can tie this all to cancer, but one question, just in terms of general homeopathy, near and dear to my heart, is application to children. I always want to know how we can or can't apply anything to children. Are there any special considerations we need to take into account when dealing with children? Is there any sort of age cutoff, or can you go all the way to day one? Dosage modifications, what have you?
Yeah, no, day zero. My goodness, homeopathy is the safest medicine on planet Earth. I mean, 200 plus years, never a recorded adverse event or, as far as a real issue with harm. It can't harm. It can only help. Some would argue if you give the wrong remedy, that could be a problem. I've not seen it in evidence, but in terms of safety with children, I was giving it to my kids when they were day zero, day one, on forward from there. There's really the mistake-proof medicine. In a sense. Now, I'm not arguing that you're going to know what your constitutional remedy is for those that are trained that way on day one necessarily. There's a lot of work that goes into that, but there are things called aggravations or healing crises that can be stimulated into event. They're not necessarily dangerous, but they can be unnecessary if you know what to do to prevent them based on the law of the terrain and the function of the systems that you're addressing. But I have no problem with giving my kids or any kids homeopathy at any point that they need it.
Yeah, very good. And no modification to the recommended dose for an adult or anything like that? Do you cut it in half? Or?
Yeah, I mean, quantifiably, yes. I mean, they're smaller. They don't need as much, even though we're dealing in energy.
Yeah.
I mean, if your dose is 20 drops for an adult, it might be 5 or 4 or 3 for a kid. I mean, if your dose is 6 drops, then it might be 1. But if they drank a whole bottle or they ate all the pellets, the only thing is the carrier agent. If there's alcohol preserving it, they might get a little tipsy. If it's a sugar pellet, they're gonna they might have some glycemic response. But in terms of danger, because of the remedies contained on them, if you will, or in them, there's no issue there.
Actually, I guess one more question before we jump into cancer is you mentioned not necessarily knowing what the specific remedy is that you're looking for. And whenever I am looking for a homeopathic remedy, it's usually for one of my children, and I'm usually in a Whole Foods or some health store, and of course none of the employees know anything about it, and I don't know anything about it, but I know that I want a homeopath versus some chemical drug.
Right.
There's maybe that little chart that is very vague and doesn't really tell you a whole lot. Are there any good sources of references that you like, maybe online or whatever, that would be a good thing to look at before seeking out a homeopathic remedy at, say, a Whole Foods or somewhere like that?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's so many books on the use of single remedies that I wouldn't even know where to begin. You,
Yeah.
you almost can't go wrong. I mean, I utilize the materia medica if need be. Of course, after you work with it for a while, you kind of have an idea of the symptom picture associated with the right remedy in acute response situations with kids. Classic case being injury, arnica. Okay, doesn't take much to get there. But some of it's just practice. And of course, when you're in those stores, they may have two or three options for you on each one because the label is so tiny,
Yeah.
or even their promotional materials. But you may have actually that many things if you go to the Materia Medica that would, and that could be more confusing than helpful if you're just starting out or just once in a while using it. So, knowing that you have safety, the worst thing you can do is, oh my gosh, the remedy was the wrong one. It didn't have an impact.
Yeah.
Okay. If you're in a life and death situation, that can be problematic, of course. But if it's, these common ailment scenarios, sometimes it's trial and error. You go, oh, this one worked, this one didn't. Or you can go to the complexes, which are pre-formulated for you by someone else, and it comes in. It says this is for injuries, or this is for colds, this is for fever, and you don't necessarily know which remedy was the appropriate one, but they're throwing them all in there. I don't have an opposition to that. Some religious, dogmatic homeopaths are offended by throwing more remedies than one at a time. My bottom line is healing. I don't care if it takes 100 remedies or one. Doesn't matter to me. I want you to get well. So, depending on your level of investment of time and energy and education, will be how well you feel comfortable researching the single ingredient remedies versus the complexes and just, hey, man, I just need to get help right now.
Yeah.
And then as you go over time, you can refine your approach and become more proficient at selecting these single remedies.
Yeah, that's a good thing to keep in mind. All right, let's bring it to cancer, and I guess before we do, I want to lay a little groundwork, and maybe I'm oversimplifying things a little bit, but it seems, having dove into the alternative or natural cancer world for 2 years, it seems like there's kind of three main schools of thought as far as the initial mechanism of cancer. What is the very upstream event that is causing this uncontrolled cell division? When you ask the regular MD, it's of course just genetics. You were born with these genes. The natural world, their kind of take on that is epigenetics, which is of course very fascinating. The fact that
Right.
yes, you are born with some genes, but whether they choose to express themselves or not, or actually due to environmental factors and what you're putting in your body and what you're exposed to, and even what you're thinking of. So I put genetic and epigenetic in one camp, and then there's the cancer as a metabolic disease. It's really, you can look at the genes fine, but really you need to be looking at the mitochondria. And that's where it's all starting. Something's going wrong with the mitochondria, and then it takes it back to the work of Otto Warburg and the cancer cell fermenting sugar, that sort of thing. And then you have the third camp, which is I guess you could call it the foreign invader camp. There's a microbe that has worked its way inside the cell, or maybe it's a virus or a parasite. Talk about the Royal Rife and that whole line of research. I'm curious if I guess the field of homeopathy would fall into one of those schools of thought as a whole, and if you personally have, take a hard line on one of the three.
I go back to something I mentioned earlier, the law of the terrain. This is Antoine Béchamp, Claude Bernard. The basic concept is in the natural world, you have an environment. When that environment is balanced, healthy and functional, healthy life grows there. When something is added to that environment that doesn't belong there, or something in that environment that might even belong there that is not being removed or properly transformed, a waste, for instance, to become food for something else, you have an imbalance in that environment. That environment becomes polluted. When that environment becomes polluted, it begets life forms that wouldn't exist there when that issue didn't occur. That is, toxic pollution or deficiencies, a lack of something that is supposed to be there. At that point, anything can happen. cancer included. Now, cancer doesn't necessarily the first thing that happens, because then you have, maybe you say it's an infectious disease. You talk about the external influence. Oh my gosh, you caught something. And of course, those that understand the law of the terrain say you didn't catch it, you created it from within.
Yeah.
And it manifested because you've altered the terrain in such a way that a new life form emerged, or a life form that was there, that was kept in check in a healthy balance, was now opportunistic and say, hey, I can grow now. I couldn't grow. I was held within that realm
Yeah.
or limit. So over time, of course, we have inflammatory conditions that don't go away, as opposed to an acute, oh, I injured myself. I have a bruise. It's an acute injury, and then it heals in a few days. Now you have a chronic inflammation that never goes away. And cells in chronic states of inflammation require what? More minerals to be utilized in the healing process. The mineral diminishment, because most people are not replenishing. The food doesn't contain it. Even the organic food is not as rich in it as it once was. You now have deficiencies that compound whatever was the toxic assault that initially instigated an inflammatory cascade in the body. Heavy metals, synthetic fertilizers, additives, preservatives, flavorings, pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, GMOs, plastifiers, all of these things. So over time, the cells are in a chronic, permanent state of inflammation. They never have an opportunity to recover. Now, in some cases, you'll have what's known as an autoimmune disease occurring, where the immune cells start to attack the cells of self. You think they're yours, right? A bone cell, rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, and any number of autoimmune conditions. Now, question is, did the immune system go crazy? Do you need to put it in a straitjacket? Do you need to kill it with chemo? Or do you need to say, hey, let's step back and ask why this is occurring? There's order here. Is the immune system attacking those cells that used to be self because they're no longer self? They no longer present themselves as self? Could it be that years and years of chronic deficiencies and chronic inflammation due to toxicity have altered the cell itself from this beautiful whatever sphere it might have been to this corrupt, craggly looking thing? And you think, well, that's still a bone cell, but your immune system says that's not me anymore, and it attacks. Now, of course, modern medicine, it's an infinite lack of wisdom, will say attack and kill the immune system because it's gone crazy. It's not. Unless you think God went crazy by creating us the way we were created. But of course, that's the arrogance of medical man. And so if you do nothing, or if you purposefully shut down the immune system, the next phase is cancer cells that manifest because of the inflammation, the damage, the injury. They go corrupt, they go rogue, and now they don't die. No apoptosis, and they grow and they can create tumors, or they can metastasize, and sort of like they're transforming the life because there's no life there anymore. You become a cesspool of deficiency and toxicity. And again, this is a transformation over years, or some cases generations, generational decline. We're seeing weakness because of the exposures in these past few generations due to, well, we could say dawn of industrial revolution on beyond that now. So we look at cancer as a ultimate down the road manifestation of the corruption of the integrity of the environment, the terrain, the milieu. And so correcting that is everything. How do you correct it? We got to, as we've talked already, we've got to detoxify. We've got to stop putting the poison in. We got to facilitate the body's removal of the accumulated toxins, poisons. That could be environmental and metabolic. And then we have to, continue to work to rebuild with what it needs to be able to facilitate that healthy life that is known when the terrain is in balance. The longer that it's been out of balance, the more difficult and more challenging it can be to bring that back into balance. Now, I've only talked about the physiology, the physical aspects here. We have the same concept emotionally, mentally, spiritually. Corruption of any of those things. And Dr. Buttar, my good buddy, we do advanced medicine on my show every week. He talks about spiritual toxicity, emotional toxicity. Again, that's a great way to describe it because it's not just physical toxins. We can carry burdens because of past traumas, abuse, and it manifests. So let's say we have a patient that says, you know what, I'm willing, Robert, you're right. I'm going to clean up everything that goes into my body. I'm going to detoxify. I'm going to do everything I say. But that emotional stuff, that's too intense. I can't handle looking at that. You do everything you can, and yet they still die of cancer because the emotional basis was not addressed. The healing wasn't complete, or they didn't believe they could get well. Remember, the belief is a powerful thing. I can do this. It is possible. And you're willing to suspend your judgment even if you don't believe it, to kind of go, okay, it's bigger than me. I'll believe it because I don't know. And that opens up the possibility for healing. So that's part of the law of the terrain. It's everything. It's on every level, and it's energetic. You know, you can go to the most beautiful, pristine place that's being bombarded by electromagnetic radiation from cell phone towers or other things, and it's like you don't see it. If you're sensitive, you might feel it, but it's got that invisible corruption. That's like the emotional wounds that are not healing. That could be the invisible corruption you don't think to see or look at, and you heal the physiology, but yet you're still having problems. Or in the case of candida, that you've gone on the candida-free diet, you're not eating any refined carbs, it's all whole organic foods, no sweets, sugars, and you still can't kick the candida, even though you're trying to kill it with safer natural things. And it's usually because you didn't know that you had a mercury burden, right? It's invisible the most. So these are the mysteries we have to unravel about the terrain. Sometimes it's not totally obvious. It's not right there. That's why it takes the digging and the asking and the questioning, and also the opening to the voice of spirit through dreams, right? Through other mechanisms of communication when no one can seemingly see it or communicate it to you. There's other worldly ways where we can receive that communication if we're open to it. And that's the plus factor that they don't teach in medical school. So I don't know if that's too much of an answer for you, but hopefully that's helpful.
Well, no, and it's, you touched on just about, everything that I'm interested in as a whole in natural health and healing. And I guess the more the more you research all this and find out, the more you can't really just drill it down to what homeopathic product should I take for cancer. It's obviously much bigger than that. And that's, it's funny you said that about the EMFs too, because that's. I think my wife and I must have looked at 30 or 40 houses when we moved and we were trying to find a place to live, and the first thing we did was pull out our little EMF meter, and must have looked kind of crazy to the real estate agent when we said we don't need you to show us around. Just give us a couple minutes and that sort of thing. But for those interested in treating in employing homeopathy into their natural cancer healing journey or integrative, whatever the case may be, it seems like most naturopaths that I've talked to about cancer don't necessarily bring up homeopathy a lot. Some do, of course, but for the most part, it's something I don't hear about, which is probably ties into why it's the one thing I've never looked into. Would you say that? I mean, you would need to seek out a homeopath specifically for employing some of this stuff into a cancer healing routine?
Oh, ideally, yes. I mean, if you can find somebody that you can work with that gets a lot of these principles, it can only be helpful. The only question is, there's just not many of us. There are not many homeopaths relative to what there once was. And even today, there are so many schools of thought within homeopathy. You got to find out if it's the one that aligns with you, vibrationally or otherwise, to help you and not confuse you. Some people have so many rules about it. It's not conducive because they'll say, get off all of your supplements, for instance, and these supplements could be saving your life. I know that these energies can work beyond supplementation, and they're not dependent upon whether you're on or off a particular supplement. So again, there are a lot of factors there for me to say individually, yay or nay. I can't, but in a general sense, I would love it if there were more homeopaths available that could facilitate that deeper healing. But in the meantime, like I said, I like to make it as simple as possible so anybody can tap into it at any time on a basic level. In Unlock the Power to Heal, I talk about some basic homeopathy remedies for certain things, but I'll have to work on communicating in a broader sense how to tap into it at this point. But overall, I would like to see more integrated at this point.
We once had a chiropractor tell us that we should stop buying supplements so we could afford more chiropractic work. It was it was the last time we saw him, but
economic imperative, right?
Yeah,
you're not selling my stuff; you're hurting me economically. Don't play that game.
So that might be a good place to wrap up. Before we do, though, there is one question that I ask everyone on the show, and that is, if you had to condense everything you know about being healthy, staying healthy, and disease-free into one golden rule, doesn't have to be necessarily pertaining to homeopathy, of course, what might that be?
Love and gratitude. That's honestly the way that this healing has come to me in my life, finding a way to be grateful for even the worst things in my life so that, they can become stepping stones instead of obstacles, right? And of course, that love that it really is the basis for everything in creation. There's enough things that people get angry and hateful about, and I just, there's not enough time for that. Doesn't mean we don't acknowledge the existence of it and maybe even try to make some corrections there. But honestly, working through it all, if we don't get back to those things, vitamin L, vitamin G, love and gratitude, I think we're implementing things before putting the cart before the horse. Although we might learn about it in reverse, however you get there is fine. But if I'm going to shortcut it for somebody, not that I'm into shortcuts, just study more about that and bring that into your life, and you'll see all these healing possibilities come with it.
Seems to be a common trend. Is there, so I'd want to make sure we talked about, you have your possible own line of homeopathic remedies in the works. Is there anything else you're up to right now besides the broadcast every day, of course, that you might like to let everyone know about?
Well, working on finishing my new book on silver and the utilization of it as a medicine, calling up a lot of the peer-reviewed literature to support what I've seen clinically. I hope to have that out in the first quarter. I hope to have it out last month, but again, the best laid plans is you build narratives and weave in the science as well. It's a big project. Of course, the radio broadcast 2 hours a day, 6 days a week, that continues. And I would just say, if you want to plug into this information or find out when and if, I think it'll be when I can bring some of these remedies out for folks to tap into. Just keep listening to the show or going to robertscottbell.com. And, all I'll do is keep reminding you that the power to heal is yours. And I would ask that you do the same to remind everybody else around you, because that's a transformative message. It has been for my life.
Well, I'll be sure to stay on top of it and certainly put it in the show notes for this episode whenever those things do take place. All right, Robert. Really appreciate the time.
Thanks, Ryan. Remember, power to heal is yours.
Indeed. Told you he's got a lot of good stuff to say. Like I said, I wanted to get him early on in the show to lay some groundwork on why it is you don't see natural medicine in every hospital, and Robert certainly delivered on that. I just wanted to emphasize a couple things Robert mentioned, most of all, this concept of personal responsibility. Once you start realizing there's all this stuff you can be doing to improve your health and your life, but the catch is no one's going to hold your hand through it, it can be a bit overwhelming. But it's also very, very freeing. And if anything, I just want to tell you to take it one day at a time. You don't have to learn everything overnight. We've been going at it hard for 3 years now, and as a general interest for a year or two before that. And I know there's still so much I don't know. But that's also kind of the fun of it too, because there's always something new to learn and discover. I also really liked how Robert kept bringing up that before you can truly be ready to heal, you've got to get rooted in some foundational spiritual principles. Your body really is your temple on earth, and like he said, you can't just pray away GMOs and pesticides. Lastly, for those of you with children, especially very young ones, it is very comforting to know that there is a remedy that exists in homeopathy where there is no chance whatsoever of any sort of overdose, and the stuff really does work and is very easily accessible at most organic grocery stores and health food stores and even some conventional ones I see here and there. I was also mad at myself going back through the interview that I didn't ask him more about these SAR codes that he mentioned for cancer, but I'll find a good article on them and throw a link in the show notes. I really hope you got some great information out of this show with Robert Scott Bell. If you did, be sure to share it out with all of your friends so they can get the same potentially life-saving information at mykidcurescancer.com/Robert-Scott-Bell. Again, that's mykidcurescancer.com/Robert-Scott-Bell. And that's also where you can get all the aforementioned show notes to this episode, all the links to all the other resources that were brought up during the interview. And that's also where you can stop by the homepage and throw in your email address, and we'll send you the 5 things we did first, which is a document we put together outlining some of the most important things you can be thinking about when it comes to a cancer diagnosis. Don't forget about that Patreon account, coming from someone who had to do a lot of fundraising every little bit, no matter how small, especially if it's something we can count on month after month that will grow. And again, that's going directly to help us bring you more and higher quality content. And again, that can be found at mykidcurescancer.com/crowd sponsor. And crowd sponsor is all one word. Take a look at the YouTube channel if this isn't how you're already watching these interviews for even more interviews like this and a whole lot of how-to videos. We'll see you next week with Dr. Veronique Desagnes, better known as Dr. V, where we'll be talking about all things natural cancer healing and, of course, a bit about breast cancer, as that is her forte. Thank you so much for hanging out with us. We're honored to be bringing you this information, and I really hope it helps you that much further down your path to wellness. And with that, God bless and Godspeed.